Welcome back to the Dershow. Well, I hope we all made it through Thanksgiving with our families still intact. We had a wonderful, wonderful family dinner at a place called Sammy's Romanian Steakhouse. It's a very old fashioned kind of Yiddish oriented, old Eastern European steakhouse with lots of garlic and lots of schmaltz. You don't know what schmaltz means? Schmaltz is like chicken fat. And in the old days, old Jewish Bubba's grandmothers used to put it on everything. In this restaurant, they actually put it on chopped chicken liver. So boy, that's a heart attack waiting to happen. But we had a wonderful time, and we got through a 3 or 4 hour dinner Wednesday night. We always celebrate our family Thanksgiving on Wednesday, so on Thursday everybody can do their turkeys with their in-laws or whoever else. We got through it without a single political argument. I don't think the name Trump or Biden or Democrat or Republican were even mentioned. It was absolutely wonderful. But then 2 days later, we had another, like a post dinner with some members of my family, and it devolved into a bitter argument about whether there's more anti-Semitism on the left or on the right. I was saying there was much more on the left, and it's much more dangerous because it's young people. They disguise it as anti-Zionism, but it's really a hatred of Jews, even though it comes from some people who call themselves Jewish. And some members of my family were saying, no, it's the right wing. They're more dangerous. They have guns, et cetera, et cetera. Well, it was not a peaceful dinner. The dinner was good, but the conversation reflected divisions that occur in America. But then we each wrote to each other and said, oh, you pressed our buttons, and let's get back to just enjoying our dinners together. So I hope many of you enjoyed the first type of dinner we had more than the second type of dinner we had. But, both are part of being a family and part of being America. Okay, so just as I predicted, you heard me predict it, that President Biden did pardon his son Hunter. Now, I didn't make a specific prediction as to who would pardon Hunter Biden. I knew he'd get pardoned, and there were really three possibilities. One would be that President Biden pardoned his son. People do that. They pardon their sons. They put family before politics or even legacy. The same, which I think Biden was hoping for, obviously, was that President Kamala Harris would pardon him. And if Kamala Harris had won the election, Biden would not have pardoned his son. He would have waited for the incoming president to do so. He also didn't want to pardon him before the election because obviously he could have lost votes over that, just as he's lost some support over that. So he waited until the election was over and determined, and Trump won. The third possibility was, and still would be possible if the pardon hadn't occurred, is that Trump would have pardoned Hunter Biden. Look, my wish would have been a broad series of pardons that Biden would have said, look, I'm pardoning Trump. Obviously, the two federal cases against him aren't going to go anywhere anyway, but symbolically, I'm going to do what was done to Richard Nixon by Gerald Ford. I'm going to pardon Trump for any crimes, the one in Florida and the one in Washington, D.C., and I'm going to urge the governors of New York and Georgia to pardon him as well for the state crimes, or urge the judges or prosecutors to drop that. That would have sent a very interesting bipartisan message. So that would have been the best thing, I think. And I was thinking that if he didn't, that when Trump came into office, he would pardon Hunter Biden, along with the January 6th nonviolent protesters. I think he will do that. And by the way, I think he now has a flashing green light to do that. I mean, obviously, if you read, and everybody should read the statement that President Biden made, he didn't just pardon him. He basically said that his son was the victim of selective prosecution, and he was right. No way that Hunter Biden would have been prosecuted for his crimes, and he committed crimes. There's no doubt he's guilty of having failed to put a gun charge, a gun possession on his application. Or no, I got it wrong. Not putting his drug problem on his gun application. That's a crime. Nobody gets prosecuted for it unless it's part of another crime. It's just never done. As first of all, nobody ever sees it. Nobody ever finds applications for gun permits. Nobody goes through them. And the same thing is true with taxes. I've done a lot of tax cases. When you pay your taxes back with interest and with restitution, with all that, generally, not generally, almost always, maybe always, unless there are aggravating circumstances, again, there's not a criminal prosecution, usually just a civil resolution. So Biden was right when he said if his name wasn't Biden, he wouldn't have got prosecuted. And if his name wasn't Biden, he wouldn't have gotten pardoned. There's a big difference, of course, between Trump's case, particularly the New York case, and Biden's case. In Trump's case, there's no crime. He didn't commit a crime. He didn't do anything wrong. He some secretary wrote on an application, some policy or some corporate record that the money he paid as hush money was done for legal expenses, which it was. It's to settle a lawsuit and to avoid embarrassment from a legal claim, etc. And then that was barred by the statute of limitations, even if you make that a misdemeanor. And then miraculously, Bragg turns it into a felony by claiming that the reason he did it was to influence the election, which would turn it into a federal, not a state crime, and maybe to cheat on his taxes, which he didn't do. So, there's a big difference. What Biden did was a crime, but just people aren't prosecuted for that generally. What Trump did, not a crime, nothing wrong, not even morally wrong, not even a misdemeanor, nothing wrong whatsoever. Putting down on corporate forms money that you paid to avoid embarrassment and bad business results, and even if it was intended also to impact the election. Everything is intended to impact the election. Everything is intended. It always have mixed motives for these things. Just not a crime. There's nothing wrong with it at all. So there's a big difference between what Hunter Biden did, crime, and what Trump did, no crime. But where it's similar is that neither of them would have been prosecuted if their name was not Trump or Biden. I've said this over and over again. The book of Deuteronomy in the Bible instructs judges not to, quote, recognize faces, lo takir panim, do not recognize faces in doing justice, hence the blindfold, which everybody picks under and lifts up and looks. And what we're seeing is just repeated looking at faces and recognizing faces and doing injustice based on faces. But I'm really happy that Biden pardoned his son for a lot of reasons. First, I know Joe Biden. I don't know his son. He's a nice guy. He's a nice guy. He put his son's interest, his son who's, was a deeply damaged man, put his interest over his legacy. That's commendable. It's a good thing to do. His big mistake is he should never have said during the election, I'm not going to pardon him. He never should have said that, because he did that, for obvious political reasons. It helped. When he was running, it helped him. And when Kamala Harris was running, it helped her. So it was a political decision to say, I'm not going to pardon him. He probably knew he was going to pardon him, unless Kamala Harris unless Kamala Harris won the election. If he won the election, he would have pardoned him probably after he got elected. But he wasn't going to say that while there were voters out there. So he waited until it was all over. That was his big mistake. Was not in doing the pardon. His big mistake was in saying he was not going to do the pardon, when I think he knew full well he was not going to let his son go to jail. Would you? If you have a kid who's really misbehaving and, a few weeks in jail might set him straight, I can see a parent saying that's okay, but not when you believe, and Biden was right to believe that the only reason he was prosecuted is because he was the son of the president. The president was very controversial, and there were all kind of Ukrainian issues circulating. And so, again, if he were not Hunter Biden, he would not have been prosecuted. That's enough. That's a good reason for giving a pardon. Now, of course, President Biden has to spend the next 7 weeks giving other pardons. He has to go through, and he has to have his staff go through and see if there are other cases like this. If there are cases where people have been prosecuted, not because necessarily of what they did, but because of who they were and who they alienated and what political party and who their parents are and all of that. And he has to give pardons to them or commutations to them. This can't be a one-off. This can't be just, well, he's my son, I'm going to do it. You're the president of the United States. You're, as he likes to say over and over again, I'm the president of all the people and no one's above the law. Well, Hunter Biden was above the law and below the law. He was below the law when he got prosecuted because his name was Biden, and he was above the law when he got pardoned because his name was Biden. And so now I think it's really a good thing for Biden to do and to go through cases involving Democrats, Republicans, who were prosecuted because of who they were. I don't know who that includes. Does it include Rudy Giuliani? Somebody has to look into it and see. Does it include members of Biden's, Trump staff who were prosecuted? Trump will probably pardon them. It would be much better, actually, if Biden pardoned them. Wouldn't that be good? If Biden was the one who pardoned the January 6 people. Look, the January 6 people who were protesting, I'm not talking about the violent ones. Under Biden's principles, they all deserve a pardon. Why? The Black Lives Matter protesters, who in many ways were worse, did more damage, were not prosecuted. They were allowed free. Bail was raised for them. And they were treated with kid gloves. And so I think that has to become the Biden standard. Biden should look at every January 6 case now and say, if the only reason these people were prosecuted is they were protesting in favor of Trump, if they were protesting in favor of a Democrat, or if they were protesting in favor of somebody who was killed because he was Black by a cop, the Chauvin case, we're going to apply exactly the same standard. And if somebody wasn't prosecuted because they were protesting the right thing, whereas these guys were protesting the wrong thing, that's not a basis under the First Amendment or under the principles of equality to permit unequal treatment. So what I want President Biden to do now is have a group of people in the White House go through every January 6 case and compare it to every Black Lives Matter case and other protests from the left in Antifa cases and other cases like that. And unless you can find dispositive, compelling differences due to the January 6th protesters, what was done to the Black Lives Matter protesters, in other words, let them go free. That has to be the rule. Otherwise, it's selective justice. Otherwise, Biden is guilty of exactly what he accused his own Justice Department of being guilty of. And read his statement. It's very damning and very dramatic. I have an article tonight in the Telegraph. It's behind the paywall, unfortunately, but it's there, in which I quote at length from the Biden statement. And then I quote from, Justice Jackson, the great Supreme Court justice, who basically said, you can go through the statute books and you can find anybody guilty of anything. It's all a matter of prosecutorial discretion. Prosecutors decide who to prosecute. As another friend of mine wrote, Harvey Silverglade, in a book brilliantly entitled 3 Felonies a Day, in the Soviet Union during Stalin's time, and even afterward, when I was defending Soviet dissidents, every Soviet citizen who was in business committed 3 felonies a day because the regulations were so broad that the tactic was everybody commits crimes, but we'll pick and choose which ones. So Lavrenti Beria's famous statement, to Stalin, show me the man and I'll find you the crime, because it was easy. And the same thing is true in America today, but to a lesser degree. There's so many crimes on the book that so many people commit crimes that they're just not prosecuted for. Just take, tax crimes alone. You go through anybody's tax return, not mine, because I'm a lawyer and I, go through, I don't myself, but have accountants go through every nickel and every penny, and I overpay. But the average person, not the average person, but many people, if you go through the tax returns, you could find a basis for something. But we don't do that. We decide to do it only if your name is Hunter Biden. And Joe Biden was right when he said no reasonable person would disagree with the fact that if his name were not Biden, he would not have been prosecuted. And so I 100% agree with Joe Biden's decision to pardon. I don't agree with his decision not to pardon. And I surely don't agree if he makes a decision not to pardon the January 6 people. He must pardon the January 6 people now. He really has no moral choice, because these people were prosecuted not for what they did, but for who they are. If they were Black Lives Matter people doing the same thing, they wouldn't have been prosecuted. But they're not. They're Trump people. They're MAGA people. And so they were prosecuted for doing exactly the same thing that other people weren't prosecuted for. Now you say, oh, no, they didn't do the same thing. They went into Congress. Well, of course they went into Congress. Willie Sutton once said, they asked him, what does he rob banks? That's where the money is. Well, of course you're going to go into Congress if you're protesting an election, just like you go to, police headquarters if you're protesting a police killing. But I don't see any dispositive difference between that. Neither of them were insurrections. They were protests which got out of hand. Both had violent elements and both had many nonviolent elements. I'm talking about the nonviolent people. I'm talking about the people who just trespassed, the people like my own client who came there protesting. I don't agree with them. I thought the election myself was fairly decided, but he didn't. He has the right to his views. He was a law student. He went here just to protest. And he was standing outside and he was waved in by the police. We have it on videotape, waved in by the police. He goes in, sits there, talks. There's a gas mask on the floor, picks up the gas mask, puts it back. Then he leaves. How is that different? It is different. It's far less bad than some of what Black Lives Matter and Intifada protesters did over the years. So Joe Biden, I've known you a long time. We've known each other with our common friends, Ted Kennedy, and I was in the White House when my grandson got into a college, and you did a lovely tape recording to my grandson saying, oh, you got into Harvard. Great. Good luck. Now be smart and go to the University of Delaware. It's a better school. I have it on tape. It's nice. I like you, Joe. You're a nice guy. Now, you got to do the right thing. You got to pardon the people on January 6th. That will help restore your legacy. That will show that you're prepared to generalize from your own son. If you're not prepared to do that, then I think people will criticize you, not for what you did, not for giving the pardon, but for what you failed to do, and that is generalize and give pardons to people who are similarly situated, who were prosecuted not for what they did, but for who they are and for who they did it for. I'm not saying that the people who trespassed didn't, commit a misdemeanor, but Hunter Biden committed felonies, and you pardoned him for those felonies because you correctly pointed out that people generally are not prosecuted for committing those felonies unless there are special circumstances. And the only special circumstance in this case was this guy's last name. And, as my son loves to quote when people attack him for, oh, but your father. And he says, quoting Jesse Jackson's son, I don't deserve credit for anything my father did, and I don't deserve blame for anything my father did. So I think the same thing should be true of Hunter Biden. He shouldn't be blamed or credited for what you think of his father. But if it's true, and as an experienced criminal lawyer, I can tell you Joe Biden is 100% right. If it's true that normally people are not prosecuted for lying about drug use on their gun applications, then he should be pardoned for that. And if it's true that people who have cheated on their taxes but paid their taxes back with interest generally are not, or almost always are not prosecuted for that, that too is an appropriate subject for pardon. But it also follows that people who were prosecuted for who they supported or weren't prosecuted in this case for who they supported. Oh, Black Lives Matter. That's good. That's good. No, 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 no. We like that. Oh, what liberal prosecutors say. No, no, no. We like that. So we're not going to prosecute you. You may have damaged things. You may have caused millions of dollars worth of damage. There may have been some deaths, but you were on the right side. You were protesting violence against Black people. So we're going to give you a pass. No, no, that's not what the First Amendment is about. And the First Amendment does not judge you on the content of your ideas. It judges you on the externalities, not the substance of what you said. And on the externalities, the Black Lives Matter protests and the Antifa protests and other left-wing protests are worse than the protests on October 6th for the people on October 6th who did not engage in any kind of violence. I'm not here making a brief for people who actually physically assaulted police or even worse. That's not the claim I'm making. Those cases are distinguishable. And I'm also making the case for denial of bail to these folks. Some of these people have been in jail for long, long periods of time without there being a trial or a conviction. So I think in order to have equal justice, in order to say that really nobody is above or below the law, I hate that cliche because, most of these things are done according to law. For example, immunity of a president, it's done pursuant to law. The Supreme Court said it. Congressmen not being able to be prosecuted for what they say on the floor of Congress. It's in the Constitution. Judges not being able to be sued for their actions in court. Not in the Constitution, but the Supreme Court has said that. So let's understand what we mean by the rule of law. The rule of law means equally situated people should be treated in an equal way under principles of law. Lo takir ponim, do not recognize faces. That's a command not only to judges, it's a command to prosecutors, it's a command to presidents, it's a command to everybody. It's the right thing to do. It's why we have statutes of justice that are blindfolded. It's why we complain when judges peek under the blindfolds and look to see who the person is. And if they like them, they give them one sort of justice. There was a judge, it's interesting, there was a judge in Washington, D.C., I think his name was Holtzman, when I was a law clerk. And he was infamous for his bias. And he would have two sets of instructions. If he thought to the jury, if he thought the defendant was innocent, he'd give a set of instructions which inclined the jury to find him innocent. High level of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. If he thought the defendant was guilty, he would give different instructions. And so you get different outcomes depending on whether the judge thought the defendant was guilty. Well, that's not the job of the judge under the Constitution. It's the job of the jury. So we see this kind of bias permeating every aspect of the justice system. So the one good thing, one among many, but one good thing that came out of the Hunter Biden pardon is the acknowledgement, the public acknowledgement by President Biden that I was right and you were right. I was right when I wrote my book, Get Trump. The thesis of that book is that there is selective injustice. Getting Trump is what Biden has said. I could write a new book now called Get Hunter, and it would make the same point. If you devote yourself to finding somebody, if you say, this is the man, now I'll find the crime, or this is the man, I know he's committed the crime. We normally don't go after people who've committed those crimes. But if it's Get Biden, we're going to go after him. If it's Get Trump, we're going to make up a crime about him, which is what they've done in New York. So I hope this is the beginning of a rethinking. I would like to see the law change, actually. I would like to see a greater recognition of the defense of selective prosecution. Today, the law is you can only invoke selective prosecution. That is, we're being prosecuted for something that other people are never prosecuted for. You can invoke that if the reason for selective prosecution is race, religion, gender, sexual orientation, but you can't do it if the reason is politics or personal. And so I'd like to see it expanded. I'd like to see, once the defendant raises the issue and shows plausibly that he was treated more seriously than others for comparable crimes, I think the burden should shift to the prosecution to show why. Why are you prosecuting Hunter Biden? You didn't prosecute, and here are the cases, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K. You didn't prosecute them. It's only because his name is Biden. If you have another reason, tell us what it is. And if you can't tell us what it is, it should be dismissed. All right, that's my take on Hunter Biden. I'm sure we'll be back to that issue in days to come, because I assure you we'll get lots of letters about this. Let's turn to letters in the few minutes that we have left. Yes, there's a change since President Trump was elected. Terrorists in the Middle East know that daddy's coming home. Biden had nothing to do with it. He is against Israel just like Barack Obama. When are you going to learn that the majority of the Democratic Party could give a rat's ass about Israel, et cetera, et cetera? Well, I think you're right that Trump's election did deter Iran from attacking Israel. Though Biden gets a little bit of credit for that. Why? Because he did say to Iran, if you attack Israel now, we're turning the red light to yellow on Israel's ability to attack your oil fields, etc. So maybe there's a little bit of credit that goes to Biden, but most of the credit obviously goes to Trump's election. I think Iran has changed its tune considerably since it now sees who will be in the Oval Office for the next 4 years. As a Trump voter, I love Alan and consider him to be a great American, a great legal mind. Maybe one day, with the growing old with common sense, you will become one of the old school Democrats who have joined MAGA. I'm not going to join MAGA. First of all, I'm joining. Second of all, I support a woman's right to choose abortion. I support a broad view of gay rights and other issues. I'm a liberal, and so I'm never going to be MAGA, but I'm always going to support Trump's rights to fairness, to a fair trial, and I'm going to support the president in his policies. He's the president. He's our only president starting January 20th, and he has my complete support and patriotism as a president. And I hope he succeeds in his four great years. You can say that without joining MAGA. Okay. Swatting should be treated as attempted murder. No, it can't be, because attempted murder requires specific intent to kill. If you swat and tell the police, for example, that the person in the house looks like such and such, and he's going to say he doesn't have a gun, but he has a bomb, and as soon as you get close, if you go further and further and further and further and really do it in order to get the guy shot by the police, maybe you can make a case. But just swatting generally would not be enough for attempted murder. If somebody dies in the process, it could be a reckless homicide. It could become a homicide. Okay. Israel's a miraculous country. If you go visit, you will never doubt its glory again. Yeah, I urge people to go to Israel. I always think the best cure for anti-Semitism is Jews, and the best cure for anti-Zionism is Israel. So go there. I wish Dersh would read a few of the items from the 10 big anti-Israel lies and how to refute them. Elon, you can put the book up. I'm not going to have time today to do that, but maybe at some point we'll have a show in which I go through each of the 10 lies, and that would be a half an hour. I could do 10 lies with 3 minutes on a lie. So we'll see if that becomes the basis for a show. The 10 big anti-Israel lies and how to refute them with truth. We've already circulated over 300,000 copies to colleges, which will circulate them after the Thanksgiving recess starting today. So I'm hoping that hundreds of thousands of students will read and understand how many lies we've seen. Okay, got a lot more questions, but we'll reserve some of them for tomorrow. See you tomorrow, and I'll be interested in your reactions to the Hunter Biden pardon.